Hundreds of thousands of undeclared dollars found in a sofa on his farm. But Cyril Ramaphosa says he will not resign. After an independent report said the man who stood on an anti-corruption ticket may have broken the law, it's now up to his ANC party to decide his political future. Will Farmgate spell the end of South Africa's president? I'm Andrea Sankian. Today's newsmaker is Cyril Ramaphosa. Last week, speculation was rife that South Africa's president would either resign or be impeached. But on Sunday, Cyril Ramaphosa set the record straight, saying he will remain president and leave his political fate in the hands of the governing party's national executive. Ramaphosa is facing allegations of corruption after a panel of experts found he may have violated the Constitution by taking on other paid work, and that he may have failed to report a questionable and highly lucrative financial transaction. He has denied wrongdoing and has not been charged with any crimes. So with his party's majority in parliament, he would likely survive any impeachment vote. And a major party conference gets underway later this month to decide who the ANC's next leader will be. And that's where his position has been seriously weakened. So how did Ramaphosa get to this point?
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa rose to prominence as an anti-apartheid champion and close friend of Nelson Mandela. After apartheid was abolished, he became one of South Africa's wealthiest businessmen. Then in 2018, he was elected to be the country's most powerful politician. Ramaphosa campaigned on an anti-corruption ticket, promises to clamp down on graft. After nearly a decade of scandals that brought down his predecessor, Jacob Zuma. But now he finds himself also facing calls to step down. Ramaphosa made part of his fortune from breeding and raising cattle. Those dealings are now at the heart of a political scandal dubbed as Farmgate. It was on his farm called Phala that in 2020, an estimated $4 million in cash was stolen from inside his sofa. The theft, however, only came to light in June this year, after the country's former head of intelligence, Arthur Fraser, accused Ramaphosa of money laundering, corruption and a cover-up. The president denies the claim. He says the amount stolen was $580,000, which he was paid after selling buffalo. An independent panel commissioned by Parliament looked into the allegations against him.
Are you concerned that this matter may lead to your premature removal from office?
No.
Because of the citizens?
No, I think I've put my case forward, and of course, let us leave it to the panel to come up with the outcome, and we cannot prejudge it. I can't, you can't, and we leave it in the hands of the panel.
Parliament released the report last week, accusing him of violating his oath of office by obscuring details about the robbery at his game farm. Now, the president has vowed to challenge the report, but his reputation has been tarnished.
I think the evidence seems to be overwhelming without pronouncing before all of the evidence is in front of us. But I think it's really the way in which he's approached it, a very secretive, very non-disclosing kind of way, that many people, irrespective of whether he ends up maybe winning the legal battle, his political legitimacy will have been damaged permanently.
With just days to go before the ruling party ANC chooses its next leader, the president is battling for his political survival.
Ramaphosa addressed the public on Sunday for the first time since the report was released and mentioned nothing of rumors of his resignation. The ANC's elective conference kicks off on December 16th, and that's where Ramaphosa will need to convince any detractors in his divided party that he's still the best man for the job. Some of the names being thrown about as possible replacements for Ramaphosa are cause for concern. The South African rand has taken a tumble as investors fear that any other president could slow or reverse economic reform while increasing debt and government spending. Despite the doubts raised over Ramaphosa's integrity, he's still seen by investors at home and abroad as cleaner than any of his rivals.
If the president resigns tonight, it will open the door for the nastiest, most craven and unrepentant criminals in the ANC to start feasting again. Are you ready for President David Mabuza? A Ramaphosa resignation is just what the crooks ordered. The next 18 months will be hell for our country. But in 2024, we get to decide if it's time to end South Africa's abusive relationship with the ANC. The decision is still ours to make.
So Farmgate has made headlines around the world, but in a country that has a soaring unemployment rate, high crime levels, and an ongoing energy crisis, is this all ultimately just a distraction from the growing needs of average South Africans? And do they still think Ramaphosa is the man to turn the country around?
This issue about Ramaphosa breaks my heart because, you see, within the African National Congress, there is a lot of divisions. So I think his enemies are really happy to see him going through this. I personally think he shouldn't resign. He must continue because he's a good leader as far as I'm concerned. He brings investors into the country, which creates jobs.
No president is perfect. In today's world, the world is in turmoil, and I will be sad if he has to step down. And to find a replacement, as our political parties in this country they're all over the show.
No, I don't think you should.
No, I don't think he should resign, because the business of Pala Pala and his presidency are two separate issues. I think so far he's been a good president.
Joining me now to debate Farmgate and the future of Cyril Ramaphosa are, from Cape Town, Vuyo Zungula. He is the leader of the African Transformation Movement Party and a member of South African Parliament. Philip Dexter is also with us. He's a former MP and ANC politician. And in Johannesburg, we have broadcaster, columnist, and South African affairs analyst Oliver Dixon. Thanks all so much for being with us. Vuyo, I'll start with you. Why do you believe this report that says the president may have broken the law actually justifies removing him from office now?
Look, tomorrow, what the independent panel said must happen in accordance to the report. It said it is worth it for Parliament to further look into the issue because the president may have broken the law. Now, tomorrow, the Parliament is not impeaching the president. It is not removing the president. Tomorrow, what Parliament is supposed to do, it is to vote to further to have an inquiry that will look into what transpired in Pala Pala, so people can have closure, people can have clarity as to what happened. The issue of removing the president will be the outcome based on what the impeachment committee would determine. Otherwise, tomorrow, there is no removing of the president tomorrow.
Okay, but you have said clearly that the president should just resign. You believe he's fully guilty.
Yes, indeed. Look, the evidence that is there that the president has seriously violated the constitution. The president has abused his authority by instructing a state official to actually investigate a criminal matter that happened on the president's farm without following due processes. The president is engaged in paid work, which is a direct violation of Section 96(2)A of the Constitution. Therefore, we do not believe as the ATM that a person who has an impeachable case to answer must remain in office. A person that has got an impeachable case to answer must be removed from office so that he does not influence or manipulate the processes of holding him accountable.
Okay, Philip, I know you think the Section 89 committee report is rubbish, as I think you put it. But why do you think Cyril Ramaphosa should just stay put, no matter what?
Well, I think Vuyo's made the case. As you said, the report says he may have committed these things, and that what Parliament has to do now is to decide whether there should be a process to determine that. So you can't, on the basis of saying that somebody may have committed such and such an offense, argue that they have a case to answer. What that means is that there has to be an investigation to decide whether there is a case to answer. Once that investigation is completed, you would then be able to make a determination as to whether the person could be impeached. The process after that is then one of impeachment. At that point, you could argue that the person needs to stand down. So I think the issue is that there isn't any evidence, actually. It's all hearsay. And there's no evidence that the president instructed anyone to do anything. There's no evidence that he was involved in any of the activities. These are allegations made by Arthur Fraser. It's alleged by the committee that these have been corroborated, but we have not seen the evidence.
Okay.
As far as I can see in the report, all they've done is repeat the allegations that Mr. Fraser has made.
But if this investigation does go forward and acute wrongdoing is found, would you be in favor of impeaching Cyril Ramaphosa?
Absolutely. Nobody is above the law.
Okay.
The president, any person, but the point is you have to get to that point. And I understand the excitement of the opposition parties in wanting to see the president removed. But the point is that you cannot do that on the basis of hearsay.
Okay. Oliver, I'm going to assume you're on the same page, though I think you have intimated before that you do, from what you've seen, you believe the president may very well be guilty of certain crimes here.
It's disingenuous for Dexter to say that it's all hearsay. The Section 89 committee put out 3 reports, a report of 3 volumes. The second and the third volume documents the exact evidence that the president, as well as the accusing parties like ATM, Arthur Fraser, the EFF, and any other interested party had submitted to the committee. Now, I can guarantee you that Dexter didn't go through any of the evidence in the second and the third volume to substantiate the idea that it's hearsay. The arguments that you're hearing now are exactly the arguments that Jacob Zuma sycophants made in defense of Jacob Zuma during the Waterkloof case when the Guptas landed irregularly and illegally at our military base. They made the same arguments in defense of Nkandla. They made the exact same arguments defending Jacob Zuma from implication with the Guptas. At every single point, they were able to make that argument. It's the same script that they're repeating. They just replaced the name Cyril Ramaphosa in there. The real test of justice and a commitment to justice is not whether or not the person being implicated is likable, as is the case of Cyril Ramaphosa. It's whether or not that person violated the Constitution. Now, you may say it's hearsay, but some of the evidence are clearly conclusive. One of the pieces of evidence that's quite conclusive on this is whether or not Cyril Ramaphosa participated in paid work. All the evidence necessary to adjudicate that question has been viewed by the Section 89 committee. Cyril Ramaphosa made the argument that he is not involved in paid work. The Section 89 committee said, based on your own evidence, Mr. President, we do not accept the argument that simply because your farm is running at a loss, that you're not engaged in paid work. This is a corporation of which you are a director, of which you make decisions for. In fact, by Cyril Ramaphosa's own evidentiary submission, he makes operational decisions. He sources clients. He advises on banking patterns, for instance, go bank the money or not to bank the money. He advises on which of the animals should be sold. All of that involvement and participation is a violation of the Constitution. That piece of evidence is quite conclusive.
Okay, Philip, would you accept that you might be willingly ignoring the evidence that Oliver is talking about there?
No, Dixon is himself now talking nonsense. You see, everything he said points to this fact. He alleges that he's involved in paid work. There is no evidence in the report that the president received any remuneration. He may well have made operational decisions. He may well have been involved in choosing or this or that cow, but he never received 1 cent for it. So being involved in operational decisions about something is not the same thing as paid remuneration. And that's the point. Once again, I understand the enthusiasm of Dixon to want to make this case, but the law is very different from his wishes. And it's not about whether Mr. Ramaphosa is likable or not. You know, sometimes people make arguments that are quite facile and idiotic. What we are doing here is dealing with the law. So the law will determine whether the president has violated the Constitution. The committee has not done so. The committee has said that he may have, which is exactly the point. So now Parliament, as Vuyo said, must decide based on the report whether there should be further investigation into these matters to determine whether the president may have violated oath of office.
Okay.
And we agree he must face the might of the law. But you can't do that now. You can't jump the gun because it suits your political view, as it does in the case of Dixon.
I'll tell you what, let me come back to Vuyo, because we need to talk a little bit about what other issues might be at play here. You know, many say this is all happening years after what Cyril Ramaphosa is now being accused of, only because political opponents have insisted on bringing it up. They're saying that's all his political opposition actually has. That's why, Vuyo, this is all coming out now, years after it happened. What do you say to that?
Look, this is only out in the public now because Mr. Ramaphosa concealed the theft. He concealed the investigation. It took a whistleblower to actually bring this out in the public. If it was by Mr. Ramaphosa's wish, all of this theft, illegal foreign currency that is in Phala Phala would not have been in public. Therefore, if there's anyone to be held accountable for this only happening now, it's only Mr. Ramaphosa. And we must thank the whistleblower for actually coming out with such information to expose that the president of the country, number one, has traded in dollars, whereas the South African currency regulations state that in South Africa, you must trade in rands. And the fact that he has been engaged in paid work in violation of the Constitution, and when money was stolen, theft exceeding 100,000, as a director, sole director of the close corporation, he did not report that to the appropriate unit. He says he reported to a respective police official, whereas the law requires that he reports that to a certain person.
Oliver, let me ask you this. I mean, if this all turns out to be a case of money laundering, basically, how much will people care? We have to remember Cyril Ramaphosa was a very wealthy businessman before he ever became president of South Africa. So if he is still doing some business on the side that he's technically not supposed to do and not quite reporting it in order to maintain his farm and its costs, are people going to care even if it is shown that he's broken these laws?
You know, the psychopolitical question is an important one. Will people care whether or not Cyril Ramaphosa is, putting money in safes and under mattresses into the millions of rands, millions of dollars, because he's already rich? People are like, well, he's already rich. You kind of knew that about him. The answer is people will care. South Africa is a deeply poor country with the highest level of inequality in the world, as our Gini coefficient reflects. People in this country go to bed without food. People in this country go to bed without an idea whether or not they'll make it through the very next day. In July of 2021, we saw the manifestation of that confluence of inequalities presenting itself to the world in what was the worst case of protest, violence, and unrest in the country's democratic history. That is indicative of the deep level of poverty and inequality that South Africans live in.
Okay, but Oliver,
now,
I think there's another something at play here, is that even if you say people care, they might be disturbed by this because they know there's so many problems in South Africa and they have politicians engaged in corrupt activities. But many South Africans still feel that he is their only and best alternative. There's nobody else to step in that could lead the country, they believe, as well as he has, especially on the economic front.
I mean, that's quite speculative, right? Because if you compare electoral data between the last two elections, while the local government election and the national government election, you will realize that on a national count of that electoral data, that Cyril Ramaphosa is not as popular as some people would think. In fact, in the last local government election, the national tally had the ANC below 50%, which may well be reflected in the next national government election. So Cyril Ramaphosa's popularity and perhaps likability is not a panacea to the ANC's integrity crisis. What you will see, and I do think the electoral data points to this, is that there will be a further reduction in the ANC's electoral share. So it may well be the case that many South Africans feel that Cyril Ramaphosa is the last vanguard against further rancor within the ANC, and that may well be true. But the reality is you cannot divorce Cyril Ramaphosa, the personality, from the crisis of the ANC's corruption and from the crisis of malfeasance in the state as a result of the ANC's deployment and perhaps even everything else. But everybody can make that argument about any political figure that they support. The real test is in the electoral data.
Philip, I mean, how much are or have the ANC's internal divisions kind of played into the opposition's hands at this point? I mean, many say the ANC has sown the seeds of its own demise, and this report now, Farmgate, is another nail in the coffin of a party that was already in decline.
Well, I don't think it's the ANC per se. I think it's people in the ANC. And I think you're right that the internal divisions are what lie at the root of this. I mean, many of us believe that most of this report is an entire fabrication, which has been concocted by people who want to remove the president. But that will be determined in the wash. Where I do agree with Oliver is that, this isn't about anybody's popularity or about what our views are in individuals. It's a matter of the law. And, that will determine whether or not somebody has broken the law. The question of the president's popularity, which, by the way, polls show that he is more popular than the ANC, as far as I'm concerned, that's not relevant to this matter, because what we're dealing with here is the question as to whether somebody broke the law. Now, if they did, obviously, it's going to affect the ANC's performance at the polls. And I think that's what people like Vuyo and Oliver want to see happen, because they're opponents of the ANC. That's fine, that's politics. But whether or not that happened is not a question of politics, it's a question of the law. So what I'm arguing is simple. We must go through the legal process, determine whether or not the president has violated his own.
I mean, there is a legal process. I know you say this is about the law, but most people believe it's very much also about politics. And Vuyo, I mean, people also accuse... Go ahead, Philip, quickly.
That doesn't matter, because when you're dealing with a legal issue...
I understand. And that is the way it will play out in court. We know that. But Vuyo, I have to ask you this question, because on the political issue, I mean, people have accused you of kind of acting out of desperation in a way to, to boost the standing of your political party. What do you say to them?
Look, I'm a member of parliament, and it is my constitutional obligation to hold the executive accountable. You'll recall that in the Zondo Commission of Inquiry report, it actually lambasted Parliament for failing to hold the executive accountable. Therefore, it can't be that when a member of Parliament is doing what they're elected to do, people say, we just want to improve our brand. Because if we don't act, the very same people are going to complain that during this time of Pala Farm Gate, you as Parliament were sleeping. Therefore, we as the ATM, we are actually very happy for holding the executive accountable, and will do it again and again and again up until all members of cabinet and the executive know that Parliament has got members that will not play around when it comes to holding them accountable. And if members of the executive do not want to be held accountable, we as the ATM are going to push them, because it is our strong belief that there is a culture of wanting to undermine Parliament. That is why the opposition is critical, because the ANC in Parliament will never hold the executive accountable. Accountability will always be done by the opposition parties. So when Philip is just talking about how opposition parties, are just playing politics, it is because he knows ANC would not have led accountability on Parliament on this particular issue if it was up to them. It is only the opposition parties that can push accountability.
Oliver, quickly, if Cyril Ramaphosa goes down, if Farmgate takes him down, who, and if you can give me some names possibly, who would step in to fill the void, and would South Africans settle for it?
Look, again, South Africa, and it's maybe important to start here. South Africa is a democracy built around the party system, right? That is to say, we vote for parties. We don't, unfortunately, vote for the person leading the party or the personality, at least not directly so, perhaps inadvertently so, right? If Cyril Ramaphosa is removed, and let's say Farmgate is his final demise, the ANC will give us another candidate. But the reality is the ANC is a party so deeply fractured, so deeply broken internally that it cannot possibly focus on governance effectively, regardless of who the candidate may be that rises up in its ranks. It may well be Paul Mashatile, but all the problems of governance that we've identified with Cyril Ramaphosa will exist in him. It may well be our deputy president and the deputy president of the ANC, David Mabuza, but the exact same problems will arise over there. The ANC has a crisis of talent as well as a crisis of integrity. What South Africans will hope to do is to have a decision about the future of the ANC, not in this moment, but at the polls in 2024.
Philip, I can give you 20 seconds.
Well, I think that would be true of any party in power. There's no party that can solve 350 years of problems overnight. But where I do agree is that this is a turning point for the ANC, and we'll see what the outcome is. But as I said, that'll be decided by the law and not by Vuyo or Dixon's politics.
Okay, that will have to be the final word. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers, and our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.